Hi, it's Liz. Hi. I am not feeling good today, but I wanted to finish my bipolar story. So here goes. Where was I? Um, when I left off, I was talking about how I had just finished talking about my post psychosis depression and how I climbed out of that by getting a job and meeting some new friends and finally getting out of my dad's basement where I'd been living most of that time. So at this point, I was turning over a new leaf. Um, I'd gotten many of my old friends back that I had, in one way or another, alienated or scared, or maybe some friends I violated their personal space and property because I was delusional. So and it takes people a while, even when they know that there's a mental health issue, it takes people a while to feel safe around you again and to feel like, you can start picking up where you left off. And it took a while for me to get to the point where I was I understood that I did something wrong and I was sorry, but I wasn't so overcome with shame that I could actually like talk to them and apologize to them instead of just feeling horrible by myself. So so those things happened. I got a lot of my old friends back. I made a lot of new friends. I started going out and actually doing things instead of just getting high with like a couple of my friends. It was around this point that one of my closest friends that I had been doing a lot of hard drugs with, namely cocaine and heroin, that he died of an overdose. And this was the most serious grief that I've experienced this day in my life. He was somebody that I felt very close to for many years. I mean, before we weren't just drug friends, we were close friends. But still, still somehow my life overall was on an upswing. That was a very difficult period mourning for him, and there was a lot of difficult things that came out of that mourning period. But I did remember some of the things that he said shortly before he died to me. He was very some of the things he said shortly before he died to me that stuck with me, especially just how much he was encouraging me to do the things that I was doing to become more independent, to climb out of my depression, and to the things that I was doing to better my mental health. Um, I know that he was he was happy for me and he was proud of me, and that helped to keep me going on that path and not regress just because of my grief. So, I mean, to be clear, at this point, I was still doing drugs. I wasn't doing so many hard drugs, though. I was easing off of that. I wouldn't say I was living an extremely healthy lifestyle, but it was much healthier than the lifestyle I had been living, where I was very isolated and very depressed and really using hard drugs to excess all the time. At this point, my drug use was more recreational and it was more moderate. So, at that point in my life, I was hanging out with a lot of people who were, well, I lived in a house at first that had a lot of shows all the time. A lot of musicians came through and played in our basement. There were crazy parties, and, that was a lot of fun. I was getting to know quite a few different groups of people that didn't necessarily know each other. I really knew a lot excuse me, a lot of people around this time in my life, and I was starting to even get involved in various art projects and music projects. I was starting to be recognized as a dancer just from like going to shows and dancing, but my sort of ecstatic style of dance was something that other people wanted to incorporate into their like performance art. So I was collaborating with people, and I was holding down this sort of 9 to 5 style job, although it was part-time, but it was like 30 hours a week. It was enough to pay the bills. So I was really busy and I was having a lot of fun and I was very social. And on the face of it, I mean, I was eccentric, sure, and I wasn't living a sort of normal lifestyle, but I think on the outside it looked pretty healthy ish. The thing is, I was really hypomanic a lot of the time, which worked great for that kind of lifestyle, um, because everybody loves you when you're hypomanic, and it's very easy to be creative. It's very easy to be getting excited about a lot of different things and working on projects and feeling creative. So that helped that, and I was dating a lot, and it was a period of a lot of fun. But for me, because I did recognize, at least to some extent, that I was hypomanic a lot, it also scared me because I didn't have a way to put the brakes on it, and I knew that it could get bad. And there were a few times in the following few years where things did start to get pretty bad, where I started to really get manic. And I remember some of those times. I mean, my strategy for dealing with it was basically to try to radically accept that I was essentially on a roller coaster that I couldn't get off of, and to at least try to sort of relax into it and ride the tiger and let it happen. Let things happen the way they were going to happen. It was kind of a strategy that you might learn from doing psychedelic drugs or something. It's like I was trying to not have my manic trip go bad, and I had a few other coping mechanisms I'd learned, to do whatever I could to try to get some sleep, if that meant trying to illegally buy some Ambien off of somebody or whatever. Just try to make sure that I got sleep every night, try to moderate my drug use, make sure I was eating enough, and specifically eating food that was like heavy, with plenty of calories, plenty of protein. Keep my caffeine consumption down. That was very important. That helps to curb the mania. And, basically, like when I was manic, I would try to avoid anything that was an upper, including coffee, and increase my use of anything that was a downer, including alcohol. I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying this is what I did. And it did, I was using the tools I had available to me, and I think they did help somewhat. The food thing is really important too. This is one of the reasons that I probably will never be a vegetarian, because meat was one of the things that would keep me grounded. Didn't always work, but it did a lot of the time. If I could make sure I could invest in having enough meat and eggs in my diet, that could keep me from really spinning off into a manic episode. So it was scary. Those times were scary, but I managed to get through them, until this one time. So I didn't mention this just now, but one of the coping mechanisms, of course, for trying to deal with a manic episode, and keep it from getting worse, is to basically just have a less chaotic environment. that means a lot of things, but one of the things it means is having a home base that is secure, like having a home that you can go to, that you feel safe, that you don't feel anxious, there's not a bunch of crazy stuff going on, or like people you don't know, that kind of thing, right? It's not always something that we can provide for ourselves. So at this point, so I've jumped ahead. I've kind of talked through a couple of years here, but at this point, this is later. I'm living in an apartment with a friend of mine who is also bipolar, and we got in a very big fight at a time when we were both kind of manic, kind of to fairly manic. The thing is, this fight made we kind of got to a point of a standoff where I was afraid to go home because he was so upset and angry, and I didn't feel like I could deal with being at home, but I didn't have necessarily another place to go. So I was couch surfing for a few nights, manic and getting really afraid because I as much as my reality was starting to get kind of pretty weird, like I kind of knew that I was entering into a semi-delusional reality, or one that was just too heightened for me, that was scary. But I also knew, well, I could tell that that was happening, and I knew that that was happening for him too. And I knew that if I didn't find a way to stabilize the situation, we were both going to get worse, or I certainly was going to get worse because I didn't have a place to stay, and that's hugely destabilizing. So, um, it happened that I had already made, before this fight even happened, before any of this happened, I had made an appointment with somebody at Multnomah County. And this is right after I had gotten insurance for the first time. And I made an appointment to see a mental health professional, somebody who could prescribe me medication, because I was interested in exploring my options. So luckily, that appointment fell right towards the end of this fight. Actually, okay, okay, fine, I'll tell this story quick. So what happened was I I was really scared, and somebody had told me about a botanica. And so this is basically like a voodoo supplies store. And I went, and this is the first time I ever went there. And I got there just before closing. I was so scared. I was so desperate. And when I got there, the woman just gave me a big hug, and she gave me a bunch of things to clean our house, saying that there was, um, I don't remember how she said it, but basically that there was a lot of bad energy in our house. And it had turned out, I mean, our apartment, but it turned out that I found out later that our apartment had been previously lived in by a pair of twin brother meth heads, one of which had just gone to prison for murder. I think I'm getting this story right, but it was something like that. So yeah, um, maybe something to that, right? And I went home, and we just instantly ended the fight and cleaned the house. And then the next day I had this appointment where I could get lithium. And that was huge. We took the lithium together, actually, and I don't remember if it had a big effect for him, but for me, it was like I could feel myself coming back down to earth. And it was such a welcome feeling because I have learned to really hate and fear the feeling of the kind of grandiosity and untetheredness that comes with mania. So that was amazing. It only took one pill, and I don't remember how many milligrams, not very many. It was supposedly a subtherapeutic dose, but it made me feel 100% better. The problem is that the person who prescribed me this lithium So I didn't know any of this at the time. I took in good faith her way of prescribing me this lithium, which was basically, she was like, here's a bottle, take it as you need it. The thing about lithium is that you have to get regularly blood tested for it if you're going to use it properly, because you develop, what do you call it? You develop a tolerance. You develop a tolerance to it. So what seemed like a huge dose to me at first and made a really big difference, very, very quickly didn't make a big difference. And the thing is, I was afraid of getting a lot of side effects from taking too big of a dose, because at first, the side effects, like I took another dose after this first dose that made me feel better, and then I was having side effects. So I was afraid of getting too many side effects, but I didn't understand that my body was building up this tolerance. So I was afraid to take more than a tiny little bit. And this woman was not drug testing me in any way. She was not testing my lithium levels at all. So the problem became when I wound up becoming more and more manic over the course of the next year, or going to higher heights of mania. And I was trying to use this lithium to help me, but I didn't know how to use it properly. And so I wasn't really being properly medicated when I could have been. And this still angers me. It angers me that this woman even had a job. She was really nice, and I I don't know. I don't even know how to explain my feelings exactly. I don't hate her, but her incompetence really hurt me, and she should not have had that job. It was, of course, a position that is basically just serves some of the lowest income people in the county. So it's not surprising to me that somebody who is incompetent would get that job. But that's what happened. So I wound up suffering for the next few years, dealing with worse and worse mania without treatment that I could and should have gotten through her, or through the person in her position. They should have given me the proper dose of lithium. So eventually I, met my now husband, and we moved to another town where I went to school. I finished my bachelor's degree. And when shortly after the new school term started, I had another psychosis. This was very much precipitated in part by the stress of such a major life change, and by the constant, more or less constant mania that I experienced over, years getting to that point. It was just getting slowly worse. It would kind of go like waves, but the waves would get bigger. And it finally reached that peak. And that psychosis, from my perspective, was not as bad as the first one. Largely because even though it was hard and I was terrified, and I had a lot of damaging and silly and bad ideas about things that I was acting on in bad ways, and I really scared my partner. I'm not saying it wasn't bad, but from my perspective, it wasn't as bad because I did on some level understand what was going on. I knew that I needed, well, when I was finally offered the Seroquel, that I knew would calm my brain down and allow me to sleep, I happily accepted it. I definitely did believe some very grandiose ideas about myself at that point, that I was fighting these terrible spiritual forces, and nobody could help me kind of a thing. I mean, which is scary, it's scary and very egotistical. And I did believe those things, but I also knew that I was psychotic. It's a weird thing to explain, that kind of self-awareness. It's partial, it's partial self-awareness, but it was some, which is more than I had the first time around. So I was able to accept help. I didn't have to be involuntarily put in a hospital. I stayed at my apartment. I was taken care of by my now husband and by my mother, and I took my medicine, and after a few months I was finally able to go back to school. So that happened. The good thing about all of that is that it turned out that the school I went to actually had a really good mental health department for students in the students something center. Clint, I don't know. The place where they have this stuff. I figured they would just have like some condoms and some band-aids and, a few pamphlets or something. But they had a really good psychiatric nurse practitioner. And she finally got me on a proper dosage of lithium with regular blood tests and everything. And they were titrating the dose and ramping it up slowly and working with me about, where I wanted my lithium levels to be. And they were very cool. And I got where I needed to be. And I was able to finish college without another serious issue. Although, they were still, I definitely still in those years, especially while they were still titrating the dose, I did have some scary moments, but nothing nearly as bad as really what I had been living with for years. So that was good. That was a really good outcome ultimately. And I've been able to take the work that they did for me and the lithium levels that they established and bring them back to Portland when I moved back, and use that as kind of a template to work with other providers. So that's been great. And for me, that's been the only medication that I've needed to, deal with life. So that's basically where I'm at now. While I'm not on other medications, I do want to stress that the fact that I've been able to get to a point where I can, regularly not be in a state of mania or depression, where I can be a parent and feel good about that, where I can, that the fact that I can be as stable as I am is a product not just of medication or medical intervention directly. It's also largely because of luck and privilege. Specifically, the privilege that my family, first of all, exists and is anywhere near me and has the resources, which is to say money and also access to information and all of that to get me the help that I've gotten. Nobody's perfect and they haven't been perfect, but without them, I would probably be homeless and or dead. There's also, my good fortune in finding a partner who came from a lot of material affluence, which has allowed us to be to not stress out about money. We don't always have a lot, but we have a very good safety network, a support network. So It's not something I have to constantly be afraid of. If I need to go to a hospital, if I need some kind of treatment, if I need an expensive medication, it'll be fine. And honestly, just the having the load off, not having to worry about those things, is hugely beneficial for my mental health. And not having to worry about a million other little things that have to do with money, knowing that we're supported and that we have what we need, um, is very much a part of my ability to have mental stability, is having that physical stability of my home and my life and all of that, knowing that things will be taken care of. So, yeah, that's how I got here. I feel enormously lucky that it's been a relatively simple journey, which I know that might seem a little silly because it's taken me over an hour and a half at this point, probably, to tell it. And this is a truncated version. But for many people, it takes a lot longer than this, and it takes a lot more hospital stays. So I feel really grateful. I feel really grateful, and especially that I don't have to be on more medications at this point, at least. I'm very lucky that it's been so relatively simple. So I will share more about how bipolar disorder still affects my life because it does in subtle ways, but for the most part, it's not really something that I have to think about constantly. It's something that is more or less managed. So that's me. Thanks for listening, and I hope that if you relate to any of this, that it brings you comfort to know that you're not alone. And if you can't, I hope it gives you some perspective about what the reality of bipolar disorder can be like. Thanks.